evening, good evening. Welcome everybody to City Council. We're super glad to have everyone here. And Councilmember Schmischer, we're glad you're back in the United States of America. That's wonderful. All right, roll call please, Denise.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Councilmember Dennehy.
Here.
Schmischer.
Here.
B. Smith.
Here.
Stein. Absent. Tracy.
Here.
Worthington.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick.
Here.
And Mayor Smith.
Here. Let's all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to turn the time over now to council member announcements. Councilmember Hamrick, I believe you had one that you wanted to.
I do. We do have a vision committee meeting coming up this Wednesday. It will be at 5 o'clock here in these chambers, and we'll go back to our pre-COVID format. We're all around the table and can
Are we good for that?
have a more face-to-face type discussion on various issues that we're looking at. Also, there was a Built for Zero partners meeting last week, and it was pretty interesting. One of the issues that they have is that if you don't have a roof over your head, it's awful hard to keep and preserve your critical documents like birth certificates, driver's licenses, things like that. And so there was some discussion of what's available, what resources are available out there to help that.
Thank you. Well, let's go to Councilmember Tracy, then Worthington, and then Dennehy.
Thanks. Wanted to mention that tomorrow evening is the regular meeting of the Community Advisory Group for the Cotter Uranium Mill Site by Zoom, as it has been for about 2.5 years now. It's at 6 p.m. tomorrow evening. If anyone wants information about the link or the agenda, if you don't want to look for it on the website, you can email me and I'll provide you information. Also want to mention that the August meeting of the Community Advisory Group will be in person. And we finally, after 2.5 years, we've gotten to the point where the agencies and others involved are able to meet in person. So we're excited about that, and it's going to be a little bit of an expanded meeting. Agency folks are going to be coming in a day or two early. We don't know too much detail, but the public meeting itself on August 16th is at the usual time in the evening, and during the day, the agencies will get a site tour with the site owner, Colorado Legacy Land. And then we're also doing some things at the site that are open to the public, at least to some degree, on Wednesday, the 17th. So I wanted to mention that. And then just a reminder that the city's Energy Advisory Committee meetings continue on second and fourth Mondays at 10 a.m. here in the back of council chambers. That's all.
Thank you. Councilmember Worthington.
Yes, unfortunately, the mayor was unable to attend, so I got to go to a community relations meeting out at the Bureau, I always want to say Bureau of Prisons out in Florence, and it was very interesting. The chief was there, Ryan was there, and I got to meet a lot of people. It was a group of the prison wardens and a lot of their employees, and we were able to just kind of meet and greet was really the whole impetus of it, but it was first time I'd been behind the wires, so it was quite interesting to see where their training facility is and to see the prisons as I luckily was able to just drive by. But it was very helpful and very interesting. And the prisons are going through what most everybody else in business is going through: staff, retention, and housing. So they are really struggling with that and trying to come up with new ways of enticing people to stick around and come join them.
Thank you. Thank you for the reports, you all, from the committees you've been attending. We appreciate it. Councilmember Dennehy?
Thank you. I just want to make an announcement that this coming weekend, Friday and Saturday, is the Royal Gorge Whitewater Festival. It's the 13th annual, and this is just a fantastic festival. It's the largest festival that we have, probably in Fremont County. I'm not sure on that, but I would say it is. But just a fantastic thing to bring the families out. Great food, other vendors, but just also just to go sit by the water and watch the boaters, and it's just a fantastic time to spend.
Thank you. Councilmember Schmischer?
Just on that note, highly recommend the Express Pass option, which I believe is new this year. I went by the chamber offices today and got my wristband, and you just flash it when you walk in, so you don't have to worry about having cash to pay the entrance fee or standing in line to get in. So highly
Brilliant.
recommend stopping by the chamber office later this week. I also just wanted to note and thank the community members who serve on our Trails Policy Committee. We've had a couple of really productive meetings over the past couple of weeks, and I think that we're starting to shape up something that hopefully will be brought to council in the not too distant future. So huge thanks to Rex and Tim and Tom and all of the community members who serve on that, as well as the individuals from other agencies who have come and shared information and perspectives.
Wonderful, thank you. I'd also like to put a shout out for August 5th and 6th. That's Canyon City's 150th anniversary. It's the outdoor movies at Macon Plaza. And so they're going to be showing some movies that were filmed in Canyon City and also have some folks who are instrumental in creating those, producing those movies and the locals who starred in them. The 5th will be a silent movie, and we'll have a pianist that actually will be coming in and playing along with it. With some other pre-show entertainment, and the next night there'll be additional yard games and other pre-show entertainment beforehand, so it should be really exciting and fun. As a matter of business, I would like to ask how many of us plan on being in town on August 1st and at least able to attend either in real life or virtually August 1st and August 3rd for our city council meetings, because I've already heard there might be some people who are, I know I'm going to be gone, there might be some others who are gone. I want to make sure first.
I'm gone.
So you're gone, I'm gone.
Mine's a possibility.
It's a maybe.
And it's a very questionable maybe being back.
So probably at least 3 gone.
I'll be
Councilmember
here.
You'll be there?
I'll be here.
I
Here?
should be here.
Worthington?
I'll be here.
Okay, so we'll have a quorum then. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Also would like to read a letter that was given to our Parks and Recreation Department. And it's a thank you from the recent canoe competition that took place on the river this last weekend. It says, "Hello, Canyon City. I just wanted to thank you for your gracious and overwhelming welcome of canoers to your beautiful parks and city. We had such a successful event thanks to you. Please extend our appreciation to your staff, too. We saw them working so hard and thoroughly enjoyed their helpfulness and smiles. We had quite a range of racers, family and friends from all over the United States and Canada, and it was a great experience for all. Thank you, and kind regards, Debbie Hindi." So it sounds like wonderful. I hope they come back again. So, yeah. Chief and Commander Van Dyke, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I would love to have maybe a little bit of a highlight or report from an email we received recently about a success letter that you also received from a citizen who was experiencing homelessness and the success of the co-responder program. Just give a little bit of a public accolades to our co-responders and their work that they did.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor. That was a remarkable email that we got from a gentleman that Commander Van Dyke, when he was in the co-response role, was instrumental. He and another gentleman instrumental in helping this young man turn his life around. And he went into some great detail about the chances of his success without those two. I'll let Commander Van Dyke speak more specifically to that, but it was a remarkable letter.
So I won't call the individual by name, but most of you know who he is from previous conversations when we were talking about the beginning stages of the co-responder program. And so this individual, I believe it was back in June of 2019, he was one of the first individuals that we identified as one of our high utilizers with the co-responder program. And so Joe Moffitt, the clinician at the time, and myself, we were just starting out the co-responder program, and we identified him specifically because there had been 78 calls for service dealing with either Canyon City Police or Fremont County Sheriff's Office. And this individual, where we had contacted him or arrested him all of these times for just little miscellaneous things. And when Joe and I initially met him, we realized that, yeah, he was out committing crimes and he had lots of contact with the police, but this guy really didn't need to be in jail. Some of them were as small as going to Walmart and stealing a knife or a pair of scissors so that he could cut his pants off because he was hot. So it was just little things like that. And so we made it a point to reach out to him 4 or 5 times a week if we could, and just try to encourage him and get him into treatment, because we knew after sitting down and talking with him, he was a intelligent individual. You know, he just had some issues that he was dealing with, and substance abuse was contributing to that. So after about a 2-month period, we convinced him to go into treatment into Stout Street in Denver. And it happened so fast, we got a call admitting him into the program, and we had to drop what we were doing at the time and drive him straight up there with no advance warning. So we utilized the funds from the co-responder program. We went to Dollar General and Walmart. We bought him clothing and hygiene things that we thought he would need to get him by in the beginning stages of the program, because he was homeless at the time, and he was living either under the 9th Street Bridge or at Macon Park. So we got him up there, we got him in the program, and I believe Joe and I both felt like this ain't gonna work. But we had to keep encouraging him to stay in the program. And so once we got him up there, we had extensive follow-up with him. Some of it was because we wanted to keep him in the program, and some was because he was still dealing with issues in the legal system in the DA's office that we had to work out. So that's where the collaboration with myself and the clinicians came into play. Joe handled the things on the mental health side that needed to be handled, and I handled the liaison issues with the DA's office. So we got that worked out. We got him in the program. We went up a couple times and checked on him just to make sure he was okay. For a while, he was about to back out of the program, and we talked him into staying in, and he did. There was even a time where he did not show up for court dates, and he was issued 5 additional warrants for failure to appear. So again, we had to work through the court system and get that changed and get it out of there, because we didn't want him. We felt like if he left treatment and came back here just to attend the court date, that was going to be the end of it. So we got that worked out. He stayed in the program, and he began to do well. I think the last time that we went up to see him, he was still in the program, but he had become the lead foreman for the shops that they had there. So he ended up finishing the program, and I was in California last week, but I got a call, my voicemail at work, saying that he was graduating the program and he wanted me to be there, but unfortunately I was out of town and I didn't know it. So when I got back and I checked the messages, I'm like, oh my God, there's no way I wanted to miss this. But so just coincidentally, he called me again Friday of last week. And he just wanted to thank me and tell me how his life was going since the program, and he felt like his exact words were, I would have died under the Main Street Bridge had you guys not got me into treatment and were persistent about following up and just, we kind of turned into friends. It was more than just me being the co-responder and Joe working. We genuinely liked this guy. So we exchanged numbers and all that stuff. And one of the amazing things that he told me that I didn't put in the email because I wasn't thinking about it, I was just happy to hear from him, but he said that when he started the treatment, there were 80 people in the program with him, and only 13 of them completed it. So it's just a testament of how hard it is when you're dealing with substance abuse and issues like that to get over it. So, I'm humbled by him reaching out to me and you all bringing me up here, but I give all the credit to him because all I had to do was be his friend and do my job, and he had all of the pressure and everything on him that he had to fight through. So next time he's in Canyon City, we're going to meet for dinner and hang out, and that's where we were.
Well, thank you so much, Commander. We really, really appreciate it. And
You're welcome.
And I think it's especially poignant because, in recent months, we've heard hours and hours of testimony of the worthlessness of many people experiencing homelessness, and there's no hope for them to be better. There's nothing better than just to continue to criminalize them. And your demonstration of how you turned it into a friendship, where there was trust that was built that lasted throughout his treatment, and now this person is a foreman. He's employed a foreman and touched back with his family and employed and housed and having a productive, happy, and wonderful life. And that's because of you, and you built that trust and that friendship with him. And that is the recipe that actually works. And so thank you. And the repercussions of those actions are going to last for generations. And so thank you so much. We sure appreciate it. I'm glad you were here tonight so we could hear straight from you your story.
And Madam Mayor, I do have a little bit to add to that because this individual, one of the successful part of it is that the individual has reestablished family relationships, and I think that is so important in people being able to find the path forward for themselves. He had a message for Elliot and for Joe. And his message was, thank you for your effort, man. It was 1,000,000 to 1 odds, but you made a difference in more ways than you can begin to fathom. And that is a true testament, and thank you so much for that.
Okay. Well, let's move on to our consent agenda. From that emotional high.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Members of council, item 7A is to approve the minutes for the July 5th regular city council meeting, the July 6th general government meeting, and the June 27th special city council meeting, which was the Energy Committee. You do have revised minutes for July 5th in front of you, making a slight change to one of those motions. 7B authorizes the mayor to reappoint Brian Ledoux, Gerald Maloney, and Randy Smith to the Planning Commission for 3-year appointments. 7C authorizes the mayor to sign a contract for services as municipal judge with Larry Allen. 7D authorizes the mayor to sign a mutual aid agreement with the Fremont County Sheriff's Department. 7E authorizes the city administrator to ratify a lease agreement with Ramblin' Express. 7F ratifies a sole source purchase for King Luminaire Pole and Globe with Mountain States Lighting in an amount of $10,184.40. 7G is to receive and file, the monthly budget summary, and 7H is to receive and file a list of bills.
Any questions? Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a comment. Our mutual aid agreement between the Fremont County Sheriff's Office and our police department is I think, an important step in our comprehensive approach to dealing with the problems that can be associated with people that don't have houses roofs over their head. And I just wanted to emphasize that the focus of this agreement is on criminal activity associated with trespassing, destruction of private property, theft, and fire restrictions enforcement. Those are all behaviors that can be observed and dealt with in the appropriate manner, that if there's misbehavior there, there are things that can be done. And I'm hopeful that at some point, council will perhaps be able to put another arrow or two in our police department's quiver to help address some of these behavioral issues. Thank you.
Chief, I'd like to invite you and Commander up again to maybe, if you'd like, to address us about the mutual aid agreement with the Fremont County Department, and maybe also talk about the police truck. Is it the police trucks that were canceled and had to be
No.
redone? Those different, yeah. So about the mutual aid agreement then.
With respect to this mutual aid agreement, Madam Mayor, I approached Sheriff Cooper shortly after we started hearing from our neighbors around our city borders, talking about the issues listed herein regarding fire concerns, trespassing, destruction of property, repeated behaviors that the county residents and city residents had called and looked for law enforcement assistance. Many of those issues arose out of what were jurisdictional concerns because there's some ambiguities at times, because I don't know if you've recently looked at the city map. Our boundaries are not real clear on what is city property, what is not city property, where the county begins and the city stops. So speaking with Sheriff Cooper, we thought it would be a good idea to enact an auto aid, if you will. This document does not require us to wait for county to summons the city for assistance as our mutual aid codes dictate. It gives us the ability to enforce the laws accordingly in any of these venues. So we're hopeful that it's going to allow us to correct some of these issues, most of the issues pertaining to our county neighbors who have experienced some hardships, but also within the city.
Right, and a lot of that arose from those on, Justice Center Road, but I'm even thinking of a property owner more in southwest Canyon, who's also had a lot of troubles
Yes,
with
ma'am.
code enforcement issues around him because he's also on the borderline of
Well,
county, city.
Yes, ma'am. And we're also looking at stepping up our enforcement efforts on the Riverwalk. We've put our park ranger down there on the Riverwalk and one of our utility vehicles. We just got we've got 4 officers certified in mountain bike patrol, and we're going to be deploying them out there. We're building a schedule right now, trying to supplement on duty with overtime to reduce that overtime footprint. But we should have them out probably, I would think, in the next couple weeks. So we'll try and get them out there 3 or 4 times a month, trying to identify those peak volumes where our citizens are out there the most. And it'll continue down further than the city border. We're going to do the entire Riverwalk.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen an increase of calls concerning those experiencing homelessness recently?
I don't know without looking at the stats. I don't know if we've seen an increase of certainly we've seen steady calls related to homelessness. I know in my short, I don't get out nearly as often as I'd like. My job pretty much consumes me to my desk. But I've seen a number of folks that I don't usually see, so I wonder the same question. But I would have to go back and look at some numbers to give you an accurate report there.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Appreciate it. Any other questions for Chief and Commander while they're there? All right, thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to give a thanks to Brian Ledoux, Gerald Maloney, and Randy Smith for being willing to serve on the Planning Commission longer. We're excited to reappoint them. Ryan, I did have some questions about the parking lot agreement, and one of them, I was wondering, are there going to be parking lot hours posted at all, or is there going to be a potential for people parking overnight?
Yeah, it will be a 24/7 parking arrangement because of the shifts that they run out there at the
And I
line.
was kind of wondering if there could be, and some unintended consequences of other people parking overnight there too, because of the presence of other vehicles, and if there's gonna be signage by Newmont Mining or anyone that discourages that.
Madam Mayor, I would say that it does state in the agreement that it is not an exclusive arrangement, that they don't have an exclusive right to use the parking lot. So the agreement anticipates that there may be vehicles parked there from time to time.
Right, I'm just thinking that there are issues with overnight parkers at Ecology Park and at Sells Avenue. And if they see overnight parking at this Constantino's parking lot, that they may be like, oh, this is somewhere I can park overnight too. And they're there, living there overnight. And want to make sure that we don't have some unintended consequences.
Yeah, I think that's a situation we'll just have to continue to monitor from a law enforcement standpoint and a code enforcement standpoint. And I don't know that that necessarily falls on Newmont Mining and their use of that lot.
Right, I mean, and that's again another homelessness issue. And will there, do we need to have any lighting if there's overnight
Yeah,
parking for
we
safety?
talked about with Newmont Mining, more so Rambling Express, about these lots and the condition that they are currently in with some of the surrounding lighting. They were happy with how it's currently set up. Again, this is a temporary trial basis. They're testing this out to see how it works. So at this point, we don't need to make any improvements while they're testing it out and seeing what the utilization rate's going to be from staff.
Okay, and then we had talked at a general government meeting about earmarking that $300 a month to go towards future downtown parking investments, and wondered if that needed to be codified or if that'd be an administrative thing.
Yeah, we'll bring something forward to set up a fund, a specific parking fund. There are other things within the code that we may use a parking fund for as well. So, residential development in the central business districts, we may accept, one of those tools that we might use is having a developer pay a fee in lieu of creating parking, and that could go into a parking fund for future parking lot development. So that is something that we will need to bring forward on a separate basis.
Okay. And then for item F, and that's for the lights downtown on Main Street, they're basically custom lights, so we can get them in one place. There's been some traffic accidents that have required us to buy some new ones to the tune of over $10,000. Is there any insurance money coming from those who were involved in those traffic accidents that caused that damage that we can recoup some costs from?
Yeah, I will have to look into that and see where we're at as far as any claims that might reimburse us for those funds.
Okay. And then I just wanted to, in reaction to some emails about questions concerning the consent agenda, that we probably need to make an amendment on the judge's, I don't know, do we need to make an amendment on the judge's contract that it ends on June 30th, 2024?
Yeah, you have a revised contract, was printed and left at your seats, so as revised.
So we'll need to amend it as revised.
Yep.
And then there was also, we had talked, some conversation about how sales tax is up $109,000, and that you carefully watch over that and for trends over the 20 years, but also want to include in that trend something unusual that with the hyperinflation that we've been experiencing also contributes to the increase in that sales tax collection, but also is increasing considerably to our costs of just doing government business. And so that needs to be put into the equation as well.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, we track, sales tax trends. We go back and look at recessions. We look, the tourist economy as well to see, how tourist years and bridge numbers compare in there. And then, of course, we also fold in not only inflation, but unemployment rates and things like that when we're looking at all those trends.
Right, and just anecdotally, from two different tourist industries have said that they're probably down about 16% this year over last. But,
Yep.
yeah, so there you go. Unfortunately. Any other questions? Okay, I would like to entertain a moment to approve the consent agenda and agenda with the item C amended as revised for the judge's contract. Councilmember Smith.
We had minute revisions too, right?
That is
Okay.
correct.
Madam Mayor
Thank
and
you for
Council, I
noticing.
move to approve the consent agenda as revised.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. Any discussion? I'll call a vote.
Councilmember B. Smith,
Aye.
Councilmember Dennehy,
Aye.
Councilmember Schmisher,
Aye.
Councilmember Tracy,
Aye.
Councilmember Worthington,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick.
Aye.
All right, thank you. And Ryan, we'll go right back at you for the city administrator's report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You have the written report, and some of my other comments were discussed during council's comments. I do want to thank our staff for all the hard work that they put in for the Canoe Nationals. That was a last-minute event, and sounds like it was very successful, and very thankful for the hard work that everybody put in for that, and including the our volunteers and community members that put in a lot of time to make that happen as well. As Councilmember Worthington mentioned, we had the wardens meeting. That is going to be a quarterly meeting, so we are working on setting that up as a quarterly meeting. We met with Bureau of Prisons, DOC, state DOC was supposed to be there as well, but they had some last minute reporting things that kind of came up, and unfortunately they weren't able to attend, but they plan on being at future meetings as well. Some of the items that came up, and one of them I brought up myself, was around housing, talking about whether or not their staff is able to find housing in this market, and of course, just like everybody else, that is something that's a drain for them as well. Trying to find people who they want to live in the community, but they can't find the housing options available for them. The other item which they brought up was childcare. So we know that there's a shortage in childcare, but that was brought up that that is certainly something for them as well. Moving away from the wardens meeting, do have an announcement that came in today. The city will be receiving the READY grant for $20,000 that we applied for planning and designing the clock tower parking lots as a future amenity. So READY is the Rural Economic Development Initiatives Program put in through the Department of Local Affairs. So Patrick Mulready and Brandy, our grant writer, both worked on that. So congratulations to them, and now the hard work begins.
Done.
Within the administrator's reports, there is that supplemental report on homelessness and what we're seeing within the community. You asked Chief Schick earlier about the number of calls. Anecdotally, I don't know if the number of calls have increased, but we continue to see, especially during the summer months, different waves of homeless, and people. It is a very transitional population, so. We do have new faces that come in, and some of those faces leave as well. So we have seen some of those transitions happening. Happy to answer any questions. Item 7, talking about our other community partners. We've started those discussions already. We had a Fremont managers lunch last week, and those that attended, we started talking about some of those. Getting together for meetings outside of Built for Zero to talk about making sure that we're all on the same page, and if there are tools available to the city, or those tools available to others within that group, and really making sure that we're coming at this with a solution mind set, but also making sure that we're not leaving anybody behind, and we're saying the same things and working to the solution together.
What are our next steps? You gave us a list of 7 things that we can do. What are our next steps towards more discussions for implementing potential solutions.
Yeah, I think getting that larger group of community partners together and discussing where everybody's at there, and then, really trying to elaborate on that number 7, taking those discussions and making sure that, we're attending those Built for Zero meetings and, sharing that information as well. And, I think, some of those discussions are going to be about, whether any of those departments or entities have shortfalls, and, taking, those actions back to their respective boards as well, if there are things that need to be corrected or fixed on that side as well.
So Carla Horn did report that they recently cleaned up 6,000 pounds from a homeless cleanup on Eagle Wing Trailhead, and I mean, let's just add that to the list. I would also, I'd be curious, did you guys also talk at that, the managers meeting about ADU, or not ADUs, but Airbnbs? And that was quickly brought up at the end of our city-county meeting last week, that most communities have made restrictions, and then it was time to close, and I'm just curious where the county's thoughts are on that, because that really would need to start at the county and going from there.
We have not had any discussions on Airbnbs. Unfortunately, I had to leave the city-county meeting, so I missed that part of the discussion. So some Airbnb, VRBO type of regulations was something we looked at a staff level, probably back in late 2017, early 2018. If that's something that the council is interested in exploring, we could do some more research on that.
Well, I think that's for council to let Ryan know if that's something we at least get information. I think I'd be curious about the data at least.
So on that particular issue, the issue, as I understood it, that was brought forward at the meeting was that Airbnbs take houses off the market and take housing opportunities off the market. And because of that, that's the tension that can be created when you have something like that. And so there's many sides to that coin.
I know, it's a tough one because it's your private property.
It's your private property, exactly, and but that was the concern, and so that was I think needs to be part of the discussion about what if there's anything that should be done.
Yeah, that's why I was curious about what the commissioner's feelings are on that, because it could be a loaded
Exactly.
issue. I'd also like to include on the improving the housing situation to maybe to look a little bit more into our building code itself. Just in my personal experiences of being able to create affordable housing is really hard when we have so many demands and regulations on the developer of creating that. And finding that balance of what's safe for life safety and for communal living between what's actually affordable, it's really tough. Because I will say that I, in my experience, have probably 50 things that I have to comply to because of the code that we have adopted as a city council that range from $1,000 each to $50,000 each. When you add all of that up into a ginormous list, it quickly becomes unaffordable and hard for maybe developers to want to continue to provide that kind of affordable housing. So I know we've made some changes in the past to make things better, like reducing water tap fees, but there's probably more that we could do overall that would be beneficial to more people to want to create multi-unit housing. I would like to turn the time over to Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick and then Councilmember Tracy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A question on the Bureau of Prison with the wardens meeting. If I remember correctly, that was started by Preston Troutman. That was one of the things that he kind of sponsored because the wardens had not been included in the community, and he felt it important that they were. And at that time, pre-COVID, it was the meetings were open to all council members. Is it anticipated that we're just going to have a couple that attend those meetings, or will they will they be open to more general attendance?
I think we could probably open that up to all of council.
For me, that was really helpful to be able to see, the issues that the wardens face, and because there is a lot of collaboration that we can do as a city with our wardens. That's probably true of the county also, but there is a lot of collaboration that can happen there, and it's I think important to keep those communication channels open.
Councilmember Tracy?
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Just a question for City Administrator Stevens. On page 3 of the written report, in the list of 7, I guess number 2 in that list, you mentioned the ongoing process of reevaluating the co-responder program to see if it's as effective as it could be. I just wondered if there's any more to report on that at this point, or just a little meat on the bones as to what kinds of things you're looking at.
Yeah, the last couple CML meetings, there have been some great presentations from some other communities. We were one of the first grant recipients from Office of Behavioral Health, and didn't really have any models to model off of per se. So I think, in the eye of continuous improvement and hearing some of the success stories from some of the other communities, making sure that we're looking at those models and making sure that we have, something that I think is going to be as effective as possible. One of my concerns, and I've told the chief this, is, do we need a certified officer running that program when we also need certified officers out in the street and responding to calls for other things? So, those are some of the things that we're looking at. We have some upcoming meetings with some other communities that are running co-responder programs, and we'll be having some of those discussions, and we've just taken a look to see what else is out there, and if there's a model that might be more effective for us.
Thanks. I would be interested eventually in hearing more about the idea of not having certified officer. I think just based on what I've seen, what little I know, it seems like there's an advantage to having a trained officer with the ability to handle emergency situations that might evolve in a particular call. But
yeah, and I think, I think where I'd like to see us get to is a point where all of the officers are aware and have a good understanding of how the co-responder program works, and regardless of the responding officer, they can effectively coordinate with those behavioral health co-responders. You don't necessarily have to rely on just one officer for those responses. It should be a team approach.
got it. Thanks.
Councilmember Schmischer?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I also just wanted to share that at the city-county meeting last week, I had committed to sharing our draft plan with the county commissioners to seek their input, given that it is an issue and a challenge that really doesn't know any city or county boundaries. So I'll send this over and seek their input and thoughts as well, and report back.
Thank you. All right, if there are no other questions for Ryan, I would like to open a public hearing. And this is for the introduction and first reading by title only of Ordinance 14, Series of 2022, entitled, An Ordinance of the City of Canyon City amending certain sections of Title 17 of the Canyon City Municipal Code concerning signs, marijuana cultivation, fences, drive-throughs, and general submittal requirements. I turn the time over to Patrick, is that right? All right, Patrick.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. This evening, we are conducting a public hearing on a draft ordinance which, as written, would make 6 changes to the city's Unified Development Code, also known as the UDC. Council members may recall that at the time the city's UDC was adopted last year, it was explained that once the code became effective, it may become clear that despite the best efforts of everyone working in reviewing the new code, some items might simply be omitted or found not to be working as well as intended. So an ordinance updating the code post-adoption was understood to be likely. We did such an ordinance amending portions of the code earlier this year in, I believe, February was when it came before council. This is the second of those such ordinances. The first of the six changes involves Table 1707040, which illustrates signs that are allowed and signs that are permitted. Apparently, or currently, signs which require the issuance of a sign permit are labeled P, and signs which are allowed without need of a permit are labeled A for allowed. Based on feedback staff has received, this listing differs from the use tables in Chapter 1703, where permitted uses, designated as P, generally does not require any kind of permit to be employed on a property. The recommendation was to make these tables consistent with their terminology. Under this new terminology, signs which do not require issuance of a sign permit will be labeled P for permitted. Signs which do require the issuance of a sign permit will be labeled C for conditional use, as an administrative designation for a type of use that must be reviewed by staff before it can be issued. Second proposed change involves Section 1705020, specifically the standards for personal marijuana cultivation. Paragraphs 2D and 2E were intended to set maximum area in square feet for how much space could be devoted to personal cultivation. Paragraph 2D set the limit as 100 square feet for space within a principal residence on a site. Paragraph 2E was intended to make the same 100 square foot space limitation for cultivation areas within an accessory structure. Based upon feedback staff has received, although the space limitation is intended to be the same for both grow areas within the principal structure and within an accessory structure, paragraph 2E, it was felt, did not make this clear. The revised paragraph uses the word shall rather than must and modifies the last sentence of paragraph 2E to utilize the same language as paragraph 2D. Fences in residential areas are regulated under Section 1706050 to differentiate regulations for fences in non-residential areas as regulated in Title 12 of the Canyon City Municipal Code. To date, Title 17 residential fence regulations do not allow the use of barbed wire as a fence material at all. Because of the proliferation of agricultural uses on large lot residential parcels, many of which are already using barbed wire as a fence material, this makes them legal non-conforming in status, but makes replacement of the barbed wire fences a questionable proposition. The third proposed change in this draft ordinance would amend 1706050 to specifically allow for the use of barbed wire as a fence material on parcels of more than 1 acre that are zoned either RL, Rural Living Residential, or R1, Low Density Residential. Further, this change would not restrict the location of barbed wire to a particular yard or side of the property. Under this change, barbed wire would be allowed in front, side, or rear yards. The fourth proposed change also involves a specific standard pertaining to drive-through lanes at banks, restaurants, and some retailers. Under Section 1705040F, specifications are provided as to the length and vehicle stacking required for drive-through lanes. However, the only land use district that will allow drive-through lanes is the GC General Commercial District, and only as a special review use, meaning the request must come to a public hearing before Planning Commission and Council must approve it with the adoption of a resolution. Given that one of the major goals of the adoption of the new UDC is the simplification of the process and greater options and flexibility to applicants, staff recommends that this provision be changed to P for permitted, since the standards required in Section 1705040F are binary in nature. Staff can make an administrative determination if those standards are being followed on a proposed site plan. Further, given that the list of uses allowed in non-residential areas, staff further recommends that drive-through lanes be added to the NC Neighborhood Commercial District and the I Light Industrial District as well. The fifth proposed change came to staff from the Fremont County Clerk and Recorder's Office, and it pertains to the material on which any kind of document to be recorded that will affect the layout of the land, such as zoning or subdivision, must be printed on. Previously, the city has required such documents destined for recordation to be printed on Mylar film, which is a type of stretched polymer film with plastic qualities. This material has gone up precipitously in price, and it is not biodegradable. In 2021, Fremont County Clerk and Recorder modified the requirements for recordable documents to allow for heavy bond paper to be used for recordation, and this change was done to ensure that the county was in compliance with a new state statute. This change modifies Section 1708-060 pertaining to Plan Development District plan maps, 1709-040 pertaining to minor subdivisions, and 1709-050 pertaining to final plats to make the city's regulations consistent with the county and the state. This change will allow for the use of heavy bond paper should an applicant desire to print the document onto something other than Mylar. The final proposed change to Title 17 within this ordinance involves a category of use in the GC General Commercial District as identified in Table 1703-040C. This table identified single-family residential new as a permitted use. It does not clarify single-family residential new, whether that pertains to new construction on a currently vacant lot, or whether that concerns a new use going into an existing building on a property. And in fact, the confusion on this was such that when we spoke with the city attorney's office about this, they said an argument could conceivably be made in either direction for this. Thus, given this ambiguity, city attorney recommended that we modify this so that the intent of this provision is meant to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. Thus, the proposal is that rather than this be a permitted use in the GC zone district, it be changed to be a special review use so that it can be evaluated on a case-by-case basis as these come up. Now, per the public notice requirements for text amendments to Title 17, as specified in Table 17-10-030C3D, this hearing has been advertised with a published notice on the city's website for at least 15 days prior to both the Planning Commission hearing and the City Council hearing this evening. Planning Commission conducted a public hearing on this draft ordinance June 22nd, 2022, and did have a number of comments, particularly concerning the barbed wire provisions and the marijuana cultivation provisions. What you have before you not only reflects those, it reflects some comments that Councilmember Tracy asked us to correct based on some modifications. You have a revised ordinance that was handed out and should have been at your seats when you sat down this evening. So we're asking that that be the ordinance, should you adopt it this evening, that you reference in your motion. So with that, staff and the Planning Commission recommend that City Council approve draft ordinance number 14, series of 2022, making 6 amendments to Title 17. As always, I'm happy to answer any questions that council may have. And since this is a city-initiated application, we don't really have an applicant present to speak about this project.
Council Member Schmischer and then Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick.
Thanks so much, Madam Mayor, and thanks so much, Patrick. Really appreciate your time and effort on this. I did notice, I think, one additional typo. If you wouldn't mind going back to the second slide that you have, I think we're missing one more C on the temporary sign subject to permit feather sign. Thank you for adding the one in GC. It looks like we may also be missing one in I. Based on this, it appears that feather sign was permitted in the current and in the draft that we have.
Yes,
not.
and I did correct that on the.
Sorry,
it should
the
be
one that you corrected was the one that I flagged earlier under general commercial. This
Okay.
is there isn't anything in the draft that we have, and I think it based on what's before us, I think it may be missing it as well.
Okay, so your recommendation would be to add a C for feather sign Under I, light industrial, that would be the column that's second to the end?
Yes, based on the graphic in the slide in front of us. It appears that it is currently permitted.
It is, and that, I believe that was an oversight.
Of course, no worries. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Patrick, do you know, is heavy bond paper acid-free? And the reason, let me tell you the reason I'm asking. The reason I ask is because I have been involved in document retention and document control throughout my working career. And one of the issues with having permanent records is having acid-free paper that the issue with paper that is printed using or created using an acid process is that acid eventually, over time, turns the paper yellow, deteriorates it, and so that's the basis of my question. Do you know, is heavy bond paper acid-free?
I will be honest with you, I do not know the answer to that question. I would have to defer to the state legislature and why they would have made this change and then, gotten in touch with the various county clerks and recorders.
This originated from the legislature.
This originated from the legislature.
That gives me no peace
No
of
sense
mind
of
at all.
comfort at all. How shocking. And I don't want to speak for the Fremont County Clerk and Recorder, but the clerk and recorders I know no longer keep the plats that come in their office. They return them to the individual that files them, and so there's only the electronic copy left.
And that is the case with the Fremont County Clerk and Recorder. When we take a document over for recordation, like a plat, they record it and return it to us, and it gets archived here at City Hall.
Okay, thank you. And I have one more question on the fencing under Section 4A General Provisions. It says barbed wire is permitted as follows. It says in the I, which is the light industrial district, barbed wire fences shall be permitted in interior side and rear yards. The barbed wire should be limited to a maximum height of 1 foot. That and also a maximum of 3 strands. And is that really true that we're going to have fences, barbed wire fences, 1 foot high?
Is that 1 foot above the fence?
I think it's the next sentence.
I'm guessing it's on top of.
Yeah, because
Right.
the next sentence says the barbed wire shall not be included in the determination of
Right.
fence height.
So the assumption is that the barbed wire would likely be on top of some other kind of fence material?
Right.
Maybe it's some clarification
So
there.
I would, to help someone else that might, read it the same way I did, I would recommend that it say this is the sentence as it reads now, the barbed wire shall be limited to a maximum height of 1 foot. And I think it should say the barbed wire topping shall be limited to a maximum height of 1 foot, with everything else the same, making it clear that it's not because that was very confusing to me. I did not understand that, and had very weird pictures in my head trying to figure this out.
So maybe we should talk about that a little more. What is that? Oh, maybe it's already here. The barbed wire shall not be included. So if you have a 6-foot fence, you can put another foot on top of that, if I'm reading this.
That
correct.
is how the draft was intended to be
Right,
interpreted.
got it. Okay. And maybe, I don't know, maybe there's just a
So
better way
maybe,
to word that.
I was thinking more like to a maximum of 1 foot above existing, or no, or some.
1 foot above existing or something.
I don't
And
know,
those-
Catherine.
Maximum height of 1 foot above the existing.
And those
fence.
3 strands are within that 1 foot.
Yeah. But for sure, we need to either say topping or above the existing fence, or, because it was very confusing to me.
Sorry. How about the barbed wire may top a fence up to a maximum height of an additional 1 foot, period. The barbed wire portion of the fence shall have a maximum of 3 strands of wire, period. And then the last sentence remains the same. Does that
sounds-
work?
That sounds good to me.
I don't know, I think that that might be more confusing.
Want to hear it again?
Yes. I'm wondering if we could just say like the barbed wire addition shall be limited to a maximum height, or, but please, Catherine, if you don't mind reading
No,
it
that's
again.
fine too.
No,
Whatever
no, no,
works.
if you don't mind reading your suggestion again.
You want me to read it again? Okay. The barbed wire, now I'm forgetting what I said. I was starting to write.
But I think
That's okay.
addition.
The barbed wire addition
may top.
to the fence, let me think for a second. The barbed wire addition to a fence shall be limited to a maximum of 1 additional foot. Does that make? There's too many additions in that sentence. The barbed wire addition to the fence shall be limited to 1 foot in height. How about that?
Well, I think a maximum of, because that gives them some flexibility.
Shall be limited to a mag, want to leave it the way it is? Okay, so the barbed wire addition to a fence shall be limited, so we're just adding addition to a fence.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. I like it.
Okay?
Yeah, for rural, if you have to have at least an acre. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, that's fine. The type of fence we're envisioning under this regulation would be, for instance, some sort of a shipping or container warehouse area where they've got materials that are being stored outside, and they may have some sort of a chain link fence, but on top of that, for security reasons, to prevent access, they want to put, kind of at an angle, the 3 barbed wire strand that goes on the top of that. That's what's being described here.
Yes.
But no razor wire, right?
Councilmember Schmisher?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I also just wanted to ask what our planned timeline is for, I guess it would be Omnibus 3. I know in our, I don't know, I can't remember if it was our last city council meeting or the one before that, we essentially put a pause on the fence height issue, but that's something that's come before us multiple times. So I'm just wondering if we have a planned timeline for what that looks like, given that it's caused some consternation amongst
and-
our residents.
Yeah, I don't know that it would be an omnibus 3. It may just come forward as a standalone issue. I think that's the sense I got from council at the last meeting. We are scheduling, August 3rd, we have a discussion on 2A streets. We're going to add this to the general government meeting to be part of that discussion as well.
Okay. My impression was that there were a couple of other small things, like the age of determining a rooster, and other little issues that may be causing some consternation when it comes to actual enforcement.
Yeah, if there are things that we can package together, we can bring those forward, but we're not going to wait for a full omnibus the way we did here, where we have 6 items. We would bring it forward. If there's stuff that's ready to go, we would add it on.
Wonderful. Looking forward to that conversation in early August then.
Councilmember Dennehy?
Thank you. Patrick, I have just a question on section 3, and I'm just looking at this, and I definitely have my own views on the marijuana cultivation, but is this what we're saying, is this the size limitation for their cultivation spot is a 10 by 10, period, 100 square feet?
100 square feet, yes.
Okay, and I'm just gonna voice my opinion here, and again, probably not how I truly feel, but I feel that it would be right. I have a problem with that, because a lot of people will have this in an area that they'll buy a 12 by 15, a shed or something, and now we're restricting them to say, you can't use that because that's within this area. I have a hard time with this, and yeah, it's just something that I have a hard time with. I don't know if we need to specifically say 100 square feet, or, I definitely agree, I want to see fences around it, I don't want to see it be with kids, but I don't know if we can sit there and say right in 100 square feet area, a little 10 by 10 area. So many people cultivate this in in other ways, and I've seen other ways that people have done it, not like real close, but I've seen it at a distance, and I've talked to people. But I have a hard time with a little 10 by, that's a small structure. That is a very small structure, and
Well, it's probably just 10 by 10 within whatever size structure.
is that what it is? 10 by 10 within any structure?
I think that's actually the change that this is trying to make. It used to say that the structure itself may not be greater than 100 square feet, and it's now saying that the area within the structure that's being
Okay.
used can't be greater than 100 square feet. So I think that this change is actually addressing that specific
Perfect,
concern.
okay.
And-
Then
and
I
what-
just read that a little wrong. so,
And
okay.
if
And
I,
oh, sorry.
go ahead,
That,
please.
sorry, that 100 square feet is also when it's inside a family dwelling as well. So that provision's not in your ordinance, but that's, so they match now.
Doesn't this coordinate with the state law
No.
too? No, this is just this Canyon City.
This is pure local regulation.
And I will say that the local regulation, it went through an extensive community engagement process in making these decisions to, what came to this.
And I think the intent here is to have an area essentially locked away from living, from, access, easy access by individuals, perhaps children or something like that. And so if you were going to use a 12 by 18 shed or something like that, you'd have to wall off a small portion and actually have a door into it, is to be able to meet I think, the intent of the regulation.
Councilmember Tracy?
Thanks. I think most of what I was going to say has been addressed. I'll just say in general, I don't have it in front of me, but I think the rest of the existing ordinance addresses maximum number of plants and things like that. So there's much more to the restrictions than just this one piece that we're amending here.
Is there anyone in the public that would like to speak? Then I would like to close this public hearing and also call for a motion. The motion will need to include that it, as revised, there has been a revision on section 4A, but there were also some typo revisions that were corrected for section 2 and section 4C. Councilmember Schmischer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to make a motion that we approve a bill for ordinance number 14, series of 2022, as revised.
Second.
Any discussion? I'll call a vote, please.
Councilmember Dennehy?
Aye.
Councilmember Schmischer?
Aye.
Councilmember B. Smith?
Aye.
Councilmember Tracy?
Aye.
Councilmember Worthington? Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick?
Aye.
Thank you, council. Thank you, Patrick, Ryan, and staff.
Good night.
Good night. We're now moving on to item 6A. This is introduction and first reading by title only of Ordinance 15, series of 2022, entitled An Ordinance of the City of Canyon City amending Chapter 8.42 of the Canyon City Municipal Code concerning chronic nuisances and clarification of protest procedures.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is our chronic nuisance ordinance. This has come before City Council and various general government meetings 3 times before. The last such meeting was on June 8th. The changes that were discussed during that meeting are reflective here in the document. Just a reminder, this ordinance is designed to address code enforcement violators that are habitual in nature. It will allow code enforcement officers to move properties that are chronic in nature through the enforcement process in a more expeditious manner. And we have Commander Van Dyke here to talk on the subject. We also have Wendy Marcy, our code enforcement supervisor, and of course Catherine Sellers, who made some of those changes.
Well, why don't we go ahead and start in that order? Commander, if you would mind addressing us, and then we'll turn the time over to Wendy.
Sorry, too much call.
Commander, would you like to address the council?
And when you do, don't forget to get your microphone close with the little green light on.
Wendy, if you could talk about the changes that were made to the ordinance as they relate to the co-responder program.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for being here, Wendy.
You bet. Since the last meeting, I think Catherine just made a couple changes to verbiage that made things a little more clear. There wasn't really any changes contextually. So the draft just had just a few clarifications in it, which should have been included in your packets.
Wendy, for the benefit of the public, can you review what's the process for a regular code violation and how this is different for this as a chronic nuisance
Absolutely.
process?
So the code enforcement team, when they address a regular code violation, the first thing we do is provide a courtesy notice, which is basically a written notice. The team member, the code enforcement officer that issues that notice, gives them just a reminder that addresses the violation. If it's a weed violation, it actually cites the code and what the requirements are, and then provides them a business card and a phone number that they can contact if there are any questions. That gives them 7 days to clear the violation. The code team member then will check back in 7 days to see if that's been cleared. But if the resident has any issues, they need additional time to clear that violation. If it's a special case, such as an elderly individual who needs to find a landscaping company to help them with their weeds, or we have a couple larger horde cases working right now where obviously the violation can't be cleared in just a matter of 7 days. They can contact that code enforcement officer and ask for an extension, and we'll work with them on that process. As long as they're showing progress on clearing that violation, then we just go forward with the courtesy and work with them through that process. If we don't get any response from the resident or the business owner, as it may be, or there's just absolutely no progress whatsoever, then we issue what's called a notice of violation, which in essence is just a stronger worded written notification that says, these are the violations, you have 10 days to get this cleared up. Again, describes the violation in detail, cites the ordinance and exactly what the city ordinance is that they're in violation of, and provides contact information to contact the code enforcement officer. And again, we give them that opportunity to work with us. If they're willing to work with us to clear the violation, we're willing to work with them on the time that's needed to get that done. If, again, there's no progress or no contact with that individual, then we issue a summons to appear in court and summons the individual that owns the property to court. If it's a tenant, a rental property, then we issue a summons to both the tenant and the owner of the property to appear in court. So it's kind of a lengthy process to get violations cleared. A lot of times we might get it cleared this week, and next month the same violation will be reported again. And we have to go through the exact same process again. So it's frustrating for the people who maybe live next door, who are having to report these violations, because it does take time. They feel like they report it, we go out and address it. The weeds should be mowed tomorrow, which is not an unreasonable request to most of us, but to some people it's something they can get done that quickly, or to some people, they're not willing to do it that quickly. So it's a lengthy process. We give the citizens every opportunity we can to work with us to get those violations cleared. And so this chronic nuisance ordinance, what this would do for those properties that are we're having to constantly reissue notices of violations. Maybe it gets cleared, and then next month we have to go out again, and then next month we're having to go out again, and then we have to start the process over again and over again and over again. What this does is if we have to issue a notice of violation 3 times in a 12-month period, it allows us then to shorten that process, skip that notice of violation step, and go straight to summons to appear in court. And then we can work it out in the court system and hopefully help the neighbors and the individuals that are having to live and deal with the chronic nuisance as it is.
Thank you. Catherine, would you like to?
Sure,
talk about the
I think
some changes?
Wendy hit most of the high points. You do actually have a template of a form of a notice of violation. This is not the courtesy notice, which I think maybe you've seen before, but this is actually just a template for the notice of a code violation. That this is the format that planning uses, building, and code enforcement. As Wendy alluded to, this is really, this ordinance really introduces an expedited process for chronic nuisances. That's all that it's really doing. And so the hope is that when we have these circumstances where it's, it meets the definition of chronic nuisance, we can get it into court faster and get it before the judge. I do have 2 changes to the ordinance. Okay, so in section 1, so in paragraph 5, we're missing a comma, and it's the 3rd line that starts with a deferred agreement. If you go to the end of that line, it says a previous nuisance, and there should be a comma after that. So that's the one change, the first change.
Before we move on from that one,
Yeah.
I know in the email that was talked about, it said that these are actually 3 different things that could be in consideration. So it would be like a comma and or. Is that right?
So I actually have a suggestion there, because my suggestion is that, so that we make number 5 look like the paragraph underneath that there under 8.42015A1. So you would have 5, A, B, and C, with a concluding sentence that says, then the community service officers may issue a.
Can I make, sorry, excuse me, I'm sorry. Can I
Yes.
make a recommendation? So I would switch it around and say a community services officer may issue a summons and complaint without further notice under section with any of the following circumstances occur, and then list all 3.
That would be fine, because as it is now, it is confusing.
Sure.
I thought it was confusing, and that
No
would.
problem.
Little structure there, I thought would help.
I recommended the A, B, C too, whether it was bulleted or not, because it just helped it make it more sense that it's like if it was any of the A, B,
Yes.
or C instead.
Right.
of
So we
with the
can flip
words.
that around and put an A, B, and C in there.
Okay.
Sure, absolutely.
And then, oh, I'm sorry, I had a second change.
I have another comment
Oh,
on
sorry.
section 1.5.
Yep.
Unless your change is in there as
Nope.
well. So one of my concerns about this section is that it's talking about conditions about the property being deemed a chronic nuisance within the previous 2 years, and the property has been the subject of notice of violation. And Catherine, you kindly clarified via email to me that most changes in ownership would restart any process when it comes to nuisance abatement, with a couple of specific exceptions. But my concern is the way that it's worded. It's talking about, like, if the property has been the subject of a notice of violation, and if somebody new has bought it, I don't know that we would necessarily want to immediately jump to chronic nuisance status.
Right.
So I'm wondering if there's a way that we can clarify that a bit more in the actual language of the ordinance itself, to make it clear that it's about a property and an owner being joined together, as opposed to a property being kind of the through thread, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from. I think my concern is it's really hard to legislate in those exceptions. I mean, I gave you one. There's another one also, but my concern is that if we put the exceptions in there and we don't think of one, then we're stuck to those exceptions. And if we try to legislate every single circumstance, we'll end up with a provision that will make it very hard to implement. And I think due process is going to require us to start over with someone who has no knowledge that a property has been deemed a chronic nuisance previously. So let's say a property's been deemed a chronic nuisance. It was a subject to a notice of violation, and it sells to someone who has no idea this is going on. The due process requirements in Colorado and under federal case law are going to require us to start over with that person. We can't rely on something that's not of record of the property. So I think it's just inherent in the system that's going to require us to start over. The problem is that in these chronic nuisance cases, none of them are the same. They all have these very specific and unique circumstances. And when we try to legislate for every specific and unique circumstances, we get in a situation where we will miss something. We will create a provision that's just not workable. And so I think we set general rules and allow staff and our office and the prosecutor to ensure that the due process is there. So I understand your concern, but that's my response.
Can there still be something though that that provides the flexibility, but also shows the intent of recognition that there could still need to be some flexibility? Because I would say even if a new owner was aware of the violations, a brand new owner might need a little bit of time to get their ducks in a row to address those violations. And we do, but we wanted to get through. She has.
Well, and I guess I
similar
would say it's a
corrections.
may issue a summons and complaint without further notice, not a shall. So code enforcement does have the ability to say, I'm not going to issue a summons and complaint in this situation because owner maybe can see there's a violation on the property, but we need to address this with owner, give them time to get in there and deal with
So
it.
the power is in the may. What is your, sorry.
Yeah, and, but we need to finish this discussion first, and then I have another comment in here too.
Okay, I was just gonna say, because she had some other corrections that needed to be.
Yeah, they're in a
and then
different-
when
they're in a
she's done
different
with her
section now.
corrections, we'll turn the time over to you, Beth.
I do wonder, though, if there's a way to add in just another word or two so that it's clear that we're not talking about the property being a chronic nuisance, but about the property owner relationship being a chronic nuisance. So I would ask that we take a hard look at that, and I'm not asking that we put in every single exception, but rather, as the mayor mentioned, put in the intent, which is around kind of the owner as opposed to around the property.
So-
And then so I guess I'd throw out there, so let's say we have a situation where the owner and the tenant have both been noticed. And the owner sells it to the tenant. So do we have a new owner then? I mean, that's the problem with linking it to the owner, because there are going to be circumstances when the owner changes, but the owner has notice. We have a situation where the tenant used to be the owner. And so we have situations like that. That's I guess my point is, if you write that in there, you may limit our ability. If someone's going back and be like, oh, it's a new owner, you have to start over. So, when they had notice before.
And I do have a further comment
Yeah.
in this section. So we've got three clauses, let's call them A, B, and C for ease. But A talks about the property, C talks about the property, B talks about the owner or tenant. And does not, and so I'm suggesting that there needs to be something added that the owner or occupant is currently subject to a deferred judgment agreement or probation agreement on a previous nuisance related to the subject property, because otherwise, if it's a violation somewhere else.
It doesn't travel with them.
It doesn't, it doesn't travel and you can't use, it doesn't travel, exactly.
So what is your?
So my suggestion is that it says a deferred judgment agreement or probation on a previous nuisance related to the subject property.
Catherine, is that
Yeah.
acceptable? Okay, is there any more discussion on this particular paragraph? Okay, then what other corrections did you have?
So it's section 2 of the ordinance, but it's in paragraph D2. The first sentence, it ends in whichever is earlier, and the suggestion is to remove whichever is earlier. And that came from Councilmember Tracy.
Got that.
And that's it.
It's on
That's
page
all I have.
3. Is that all?
Yes.
Councilmember Schmisher?
I just had one other question about section 3. It states that a statement that if the responsible party fails to comply with directions contained in the written notice, the city may enter the property, abate the nuisance described therein, and assess the costs thereof to the owner of the property. I'm wondering if the intention is that this would apply after the first written notice?
It applies, yes, to the notice of violation. The legally required notice of violation in the code. This is part of what's contained in that notice.
Before or after they go to court? Does it, seems like you'd have to-
Before.
So on your very first notice, if you do not comply, the city could abate regardless of what the written notice was about?
No.
Okay.
I don't think I understand your question.
So this states that if the responsible party fails to comply with directions contained in the written notice, I'm asking if that is the very first notice given.
Right, and this is a requirement for that notice that it include that statement.
Right.
So this
So
comes
my concern is that if you fail to comply the very first time that you were noticed, that the city can enter your property and abate it.
Oh, so, but you're saying, this is actually saying that in that first notice, it
Notice.
has to say that the city can come in. And so there might need to be, it's not that they're gonna come in after the first notice, because you, I mean, you have to go through the process before you abate.
Also a due process violation for us to come in
Yeah,
without
but
the
this
court order.
sounds like, to the common reader, that after the first notice, the city's coming in and abating. And is there a way we can reword that so it's?
But it's the totality of the section, isn't it? We just have an excerpt here.
Right, and I was gonna
There's
say,
a-
it's on the notice currently, so.
There's a list of items that have to be contained in the notice. And one of the reasons that item is listed there is because we want to put people
On notice.
at notice as soon as possible that if they don't comply, eventually down the line, we can lien the property abate. and-
Okay, so this would make more sense if it was it was included in the entirety of what's
whole
under
section.
section 3. Instead, yeah, okay. Sergeant, or Commander Van Dyke.
I just
you move
wanted
up
to
so
note
fast.
that in addition to the ordinance, there are a couple procedural things that Wendy and her team do also. They do one of two things. They go out and they issue courtesy warnings to the individual and try to contact the individual in person prior to any enforcement action at all. So I know that's something that's not discussed in here, but it's just another thing that they do prior to getting right into enforcement action. And the second thing that they do to try to prevent this from being a chronic nuisance is they send out a follow-up letter after the person actually fixes the issue. So I just wanted to throw that out there so that you all know that that was included in the process also.
And if I can follow up with that, I mean, those processes are in the manual we're working on, almost finished, finally, for code enforcement. So that walks them through those steps, even though it's not in the code. Because those are not part of the legal process. They have no legal meaning, but we want them to be in the policy manual.
Are there any other corrections before I turn the time over?
I do have a couple more discussion items if we,
Would you want to do that before we invite Beth to
The-
address council?
perhaps,
Okay,
because
might help.
it might help, it might not, but
Okay.
it might. So I'm looking at chronic nuisances, and a chronic nuisance shall be deemed to exist under the following circumstances. Factors to be considered may be, but are not limited to, and then on page 2 at the top, it says D, a property which activity constituting a nuisance under this code is visually observed, witnessed, and documented by the community services officers on 3 or more occasions during any 60-day period. And I just want to make sure that it's clear in the code that they can't all occur on the same day. It says occasions. So if you observe and leave and come back and observe again, that's a separate occasion. And so I would recommend that we say after 3 or more occasions that we add on separate days. And then on number 3, below that, it says, when the property owner permits an action or condition to occur or exist which intrudes on the ability of neighbors or citizens to use or enjoy their properties or public property adjacent to where the nuisance occurs, or fails to perform a duty or action that results in the same. And so we're using plural, neighbors and citizens. What if it's just one citizen? And so that's just a question, an observation, I guess, is that, so right now, it would seem to me that this is 2 or more, that it's not just one person that is coming forward and saying, hey, I don't like what somebody's doing over there. And is my reading correct, I guess, is the best way to ask that it would take more than one citizen to complain before this was activated?
What? Well, I was just thinking that chronic nuisances, this is pretty intense, right? And it almost seems like we'd almost need to have more than one person upset about it, instead of just one super cranky person that's mad about everything.
So
Go ahead.
I just want to say, I don't think this has to do with people complaining. It's about whether or not the property conditions are affecting more than one person. So, for
So
instance.
the plurals take care of it, essentially.
So
is
it has
what
to
you're saying.
affect multiple people or
Yeah.
citizens.
Yeah, I think
Instead of just one.
chronic nuisances are so bad, they affect the entire block or the entire neighborhood. It's not just, my neighbor doesn't like my weeds or something like that, my one neighbor. So yeah, it's supposed to be more of a collective impact. I don't know of a nuisance that would fall into the chronic nuisance realm that we have right now that just involves one complaining party.
So, as an example, we've had situations where there's so much garbage or trash within a yard that it's attracting vermin and rodents and those types of things. That's not just affecting the person directly across the alley, that's infecting everybody up and down the alley.
Thank you.
For the benefit of the public, Catherine, and we talked about this in general government, but we are in the first reading at a city council meeting. What are some circumstances that would qualify as a chronic nuisance that would apply to this ordinance?
So I'll give an example of a nuisance that's maybe on its way to permanent resolution. We had a piece of property where previous to the owner's death, people were camping on the property. There was illegal activity on the property. There were illegal fires on the property. One of the buildings burned. There was trash and junk just everywhere. The owner in the process, unfortunately, died. And what we're seeing a lot of is I'll just say heirs, because we don't know if they're heirs or not, the children don't have the capacity, financial, emotional, mental, or otherwise, to actually go through a technical probate process, which is not easy necessarily. And so the property sits in this kind of limbo where the estate owns it, but the person isn't deceased. And in this case, one of the children came on the property, and the illegal activity just exponentially went crazy. The buildings were falling down. There was more junk on the property, that kind of thing. So it's just, and that, we're talking 3 years? 4 years, maybe?
It changed ownership due to property tax purchases.
Well, finally, yes,
so-
but the
so it-
nuisance abatement has gone on. It was here when I started in
So
17.
I would say at least 3 years.
Yeah, so that's the kind of
So
case.
these are extreme cases.
Yeah, they are the extreme cases.
Since we're on the subject of the property owner just, dying and that complicating the process, and that's kind of on item B, I remember that we also had in the past, a chronic nuisance, but they didn't die, but they were in jail for a long time.
Yep.
And that also really complicated it. And I didn't know if something needed to be included in this code for situations like that, or if that's just getting too specific about it.
We're actually nearing the end of resolving that chronic nuisance. I'm a little concerned about saying it's abandoned if someone's in jail. They still have rights to the property. And actually, it's a little bit challenging just dealing with the DOC and getting to them, but they are, we can serve them and they are there. So, I'm a little less concerned about.
They still have an ability to do something.
Yeah, we can typically find them. This person luckily happens to still be in the state of Colorado in the DOC's custody, and so, but yeah, we've had to jump through lots of hoops on that one, but we have gotten there. So, yeah, and there was another element to that that's not really chronic nuisance related. There was a lien on the property, and so we had to resolve that through the Department of Ag, and so that kind of thing. But I would, when someone's deceased, their rights on the property are indeed gone. When someone's in prison, I would say that's not quite the same.
Okay,
So I'd be a little
gotcha.
concerned about
Okay,
calling
sure.
it abandoned.
I would like to invite Beth Ketchmar to come and address council.
Thank you. Beth Ketchmar, 509 Main Street. So I sat through the previous discussion when you guys had talking about these chronic nuisances, and I just wanted to say I totally appreciate all the difficulties of chronic nuisance properties, dealing with absentee landowners, people who have mental capacities or incapacities to deal with things, and people who won't deal with properties and problem properties. And I would just like to say that you say about courtesy calls and leaving business cards and courtesy letters and how you don't have to serve things. And I just want to say, and I've spoken to several of the council members about our specific issues. And we're going to court tomorrow for the second time on a property that we just bought and had no notice that there had any violations, and it had been served the notice of violations to deal with that property. So we're going to take time out of our lives and all the things that we have to do and all the things we do in the community to go talk about this. And we've never received a courtesy phone call, a courtesy business card, a courtesy letter, any courtesy about 2 different issues. And we do have another property that has one person who specifically complains about one specific issue every time the wind blows. And so we just received notice of violations, and we're now going to go to court again. And I just think that sometimes you guys maybe need to think about who you're dealing with when you talk about, and just to serve notice of violations, you have 48 hours to comply. We've never received a 7-day notice or a 10-day notice, or we've complied, we've dealt with the issues, it was just, we don't feel like we've been treated fairly with by the city or by the building department or by the city's prosecutor. So, thank you.
Excuse me, may I ask, Beth, when you purchased this property, how long after you purchased the property did you get your first violation?
we didn't even know about it until we went to court for this other thing, and we were told that we were going to become to court on this other property, and we're like, we just bought this property, what are you talking about?
Okay.
And then we met with the building official, and she gave us all the notices of violation, which did not come up in the title search, did not come up in the title. It's not public record. It's not something that was posted on the property. And we knew there was issues with the property. We bought it off the person who bought it off the person who was in chronic condition, and we knew there was problems. But that's what we do. We specialize in buying the worst property in a neighborhood and fixing it up and making it habitable. We've done this for 45 years, and we've never, ever been treated like this before. Yeah, I'm sorry, this is very upsetting
And-
that we've been treated like this.
May I? Catherine, I think this is kind of what we were addressing here as far as when somebody acquires a property. I think this is a classic example that, wow, here, and now she has a court date, but it's a property and again, I don't know the full time frame on this, but this is where I think we can get in big trouble with this. As I don't want to be the judge on this, because this is somebody, and whether or not that she knew that there was violations or not, it's still a new property owner, and I just have a hard time with that as far as setting it, saying this is it, because here's a classic example of somebody buying a property, and then all of a sudden, bang, they've had, and if there was no notices or no time frame, I think this is just an unjust thing for one of our citizens.
Well, I'm not going to discuss the prosecution of a case in a city council meeting, so I'm not going to respond to the comments. But, if you want to put a new owner restriction, it's your ordinance, it's your prerogative, so, and if we run into issues, then we're not going to be able to necessarily move forward, so it's your call.
And I'd just like to say, I don't know if you want to put anything in an ordinance. I just think that some people should do what they should do what they say, and not just say that they do something that they don't, they don't treat people the way they say they're being treated.
Councilmember Worthington?
It's funny, I was thinking earlier, and I thought, well. No. I was thinking earlier, is there a way for a tracking of that enforcement issues to go with the title so that when Beth did do the search, that they could have found that?
We can record notices of violation against the property. The only kind of more practical issue with that is, we could record the notice of violation, and then Wendy was describing, the owner comes into compliance. So then we got to record something else.
Take it out. Okay.
So, that property did have a lien on it for abatements, previous abatements on it when it was purchased. Those liens are of record. So it was of record that there had been abatement activity previously because that lien had not been paid. It was paid off during the closing. So there was some items of record, I would say, so.
Wendy has her hand up, and then I do have a comment as well regarding new
Wendy,
owners.
then Ryan.
I would just like to maybe clarify. So the chronic nuisance ordinance is for municipal code violations, and most of what, if not all of what Ms. Ketchmeyer was talking about are building code violations. So they're not one and the same. I don't know if there's something similar for building code violations or not, but we didn't have any open code violations on any of her properties. We had just done one abatement on one that she had just purchased, and like Catherine said, that was all the liens were still on the property when she bought it. But the chronic nuisance ordinance is for municipal code violations on nuisance properties, not building code violations.
Thanks for that clarification.
And the only other comment regarding a new owner provision is I would go back to what Catherine said earlier, where there are circumstances where People have sold properties, leased them back. There is also the consideration of LLCs can be owners of properties as well, and you can run the risk of running into a shell game as well, where people are setting up LLCs and just transferring properties to get out of notices of violations.
I just think that maybe the message loud and clear is from our citizen is to really make sure that we're being conscientious on these particular circumstances and the customer service that we're delivering. Councilmember Schmischer?
I have one more comment on section 1.5, and then I also just wanted to follow up on my question on section 3. I'm wondering if on the third provision, the municipal court has deemed the property a chronic nuisance within the previous 2 years, we could just add, and there is continuity in the owner or occupant, so that it's clear that it's an or situation. If there is continuity in either regard, that it would apply. But again, I'm just concerned about it being tied to the property and not tied to the person. So I think if we added in a little bit more language around that would be much appreciated.
What page are you on?
So that's in 5, is that
Yeah, so
paragraph
section
5?
1.5, as I understand it, there will now be 3 different provisions, or 3 different triggers. The third one being the municipal court has deemed the property a chronic nuisance within the previous 2 years.
Okay.
And I think that's the one that I'm particularly concerned about, it being tied to the property rather than tied to some continuity in a person. So I'm wondering if we just added within the previous 2 years and there is continuity in the owner or occupant, to make it clear that it doesn't matter if it's the owner or the tenant, if either party is still involved in the property, that this trigger could still happen.
And that would seem to cover the case where there was a lease back or something like that, because it would still be the same occupant.
Does that provide, but could that potentially give some limitations for maybe an unforeseen circumstance?
Sorry. It could be interpreted that the continuity is only like in the owner or the occupant and they can't switch roles. We could put an and or in there to redress that. Those are the exceptions that I think came to mind for Ryan and I, is that switching, because we've actually seen that occur. I think Ryan's brought up a really good point about entities owning property. We do run into that occasionally here. That language is very difficult to draft about who, because we often don't have the ownership documents for the entity. We just don't have that information. We won't have access to it. We don't spend our time trying to get it. That's just not this process. And so we can put this language in there, and then, we may have some issues with some entities and dealing with that if they, transfer to a different entity. Oh, now it's a new owner. They could break that cycle, but it's really the same person behind the entity. So that's one that
I
we
don't know
can't.
if that really changes. I don't know if the addition really makes a significant, I don't know.
You don't think it adds value, or
I'm
you?
not sure.
Or you
I don't know if it adds enough value to justify its addition.
I think the challenge that we run into right now is if you have a property that is a chronic nuisance and it is sold, then the new owner is already without any notice and without any warning subject to being a chronic nuisance. So like immediately, because what we're saying is that the trigger is the property is a chronic nuisance. So it doesn't give a new owner any opportunity to remedy a situation. It immediately puts them into chronic nuisance territory. So I think if we add in a restriction about it being tied to, like, you are the owner or you are the occupant that was there when it was a chronic nuisance, like that's the situation that we want to immediately trigger. If it's a new person, we want those courtesy notices, we want We want to do everything that we can to give them time to fix the problem instead of creating an acrimonious relationship unnecessarily.
However, the ability to know if the new owner is still the new owner or not the new owner, if it's owned by multiple LLCs, that gets super complicated. And I think that's where the may in bold and italics and taking, strong messages from council that we need to be really careful. And let's just say, this does not happen all the time. This is unusual, and this is an outlier situation. This is not a common.
They are outlier
Yeah.
situations. I think we kind of talked percentages and numbers during the general government meeting, and I don't remember what they were, but I can tell you that the cases that fall within this are, 8 to 15. They go up and down, kind of, some, get better, and we don't have this in the code now, so, we have these kind of repeat offenders that get better and come back and that kind of thing. I guess I'd also offer, we can address your specific concerns in better detail and guidance in the policy manual to say, if you think a property is going to be subject to this, you need to confirm that the owner and the current owner and current occupant have provided notice. Any discussion needs to be, gone up to either, the city administrator, the city prosecutor, the city attorney to discuss whether this really truly is a chronic nuisance before a summons and complaint is issued under this provision. We can provide a little bit more flexible guidance that's easier to draft in a policy manual than it is to draft in legislation. So that's.
To me, and maybe clarify, what it sounds like you're trying to accomplish is this person just moving constantly and creating more nuisances all the way around town, correct?
No, it's just for that one piece of property.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to prevent is if you have somebody who has bought a property that did not have any previous ties to that property, but that property is considered a chronic nuisance, I don't think that person should be summoned to court a week later over, and I'm not referencing any particular case, but I think the way that this is drafted right now, that could happen. And I don't want to see that happen. I think that
there could be some situations where if there was something life-threatening and really, really bad, and we could give some like, no, I don't want to give it publicly because it is a situation that has happened in our community. It really does need to be rectified really fast because there's children's lives could be in danger.
Sure, but that's not what this says. And
Well,
I
and
would,
that's a
I would
different-
rather that
that's
our city
already
ordinance
in
protect our residents rather than protecting our city. But
And I would say the immediate preservation of life safety is actually already in the nuisance
Okay.
chapter. So we
That would
wouldn't,
be covered. That would
we
be totally
wouldn't
separate.
get into the chronic nuisance issue if there was something like that.
Gotcha.
I did have just one other, unless other people want to talk more about section
Councilmember
5.
Tracy did put up her button.
I just have a quick comment. I agree with what Attorney Sellers said just a bit ago about some of the more complex situations are probably better addressed through a policy manual rather than trying to get it all into the ordinance. So just want to say that.
Back to you, Councilmember Schmischer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I went and read the current section 3 in our current chapter 842-010C6, and the change that we're making, like so page 3, section 3, the change that we're making is actually to remove a provision that is within that language that says a statement that if the responsible party fails to comply with directions contained in the written notice, what it currently says is, or file a written protest thereto in the time allowed, the city may enter the property. So the change that we are proposing is to remove the option of someone filing a written protest in the time allowed. So I just wanted to make that clear because I don't think it's clear in our red line version.
Oh, it's actually in the title of the ordinance. So what happened is when for those of you who are on council, remember the rewrite of Title 8, there was a protest process in there when you got issued a notice of violation. We removed that it mistakenly got left in that sentence, a reference to it. So there's no protest process anymore, and there hasn't been for several years. And so it was just a correction, and we just wanted to clarify and pull that out, so.
Thank you.
Sure.
It wasn't clear what the change was, so.
You know, it's hard when
good to
there's
know what the change is.
parts of a section in there, and we don't know that.
Sure, but
We
no, in
can-
this sentence, like, that is actually currently in our code. It just isn't in our red line version.
So, we can talk about this more at another time. We can do your ordinances differently. Just for an example, we have a client and their ordinance show additions and italics and strike-throughs, so you see the entire thing. We can shift your process, whatever makes it easier for you.
There's been a couple situations tonight where there was some misunderstanding and like, well, actually, there's more to this section. This is just one of it. It'd be nice to know the whole section.
We can make it more comprehensive. They're gonna get a little longer maybe, but we can do that.
Kill a few more trees.
And then.
Well, we'll give it a shot, see if you like it. How about that?
That would be awesome, from my perspective. I also just wanted to clarify that I went ahead and read the next section that speaks to when the city can actually enter the property, because that is a big concern of mine. And it's if an emergency exists that imminently threatens health, safety, and welfare of the public. So while that is not what is actually written in the notice of code violation, the next section does specify that the city is only allowed to enter in those situations. So
Yeah,
I wanted
which is-
to provide
Which
that
just
as well.
addresses the comment I was getting all passionate about. It was already there,
Yep.
but I didn't know it. All
I
right.
don't believe I have never used that provision in any client's jurisdiction. No nuisance has ever gone to that level.
To that level.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, thank you.
Well, we've had a pretty robust conversation on this ordinance. If you feel ready, I would, well, maybe before I ask for a motion, is there any further comments from Wendy, Commander, Catherine?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to point out, I don't disagree with any of your comments, and I think Catherine Sellers has identified the process that we can resolve all of that through our policy manual. This is a streamlined process to help our code enforcement officers. Just to give you a little idea of what they're dealing with, and just kudos to Wendy and her team. Between the first and second quarter, we've seen 45% increase in code calls. We've seen 214% increase in parking enforcement. And we've seen 56% overall. If you take these numbers, and I'm doing my math right, and I did it 3 or 4 times, but I could still be wrong. The amount of time on a very minimal scale, if I assign 30 minutes to each one of those tasks, and that's grossly underestimated, they're presently at the levels of follow-ups and code calls, animal calls, parking, at about 2,540 hours. They only work 2,080 hours a year. So I just wanted to point that out. This is just a process to help get the ship down the lane a little smoother. So,
Thank you for that data.
thank you.
Thank you, Wendy, and Commander Van Dyke, too, and your teams. Wendy?
If the council would like, I have a couple of pictures here. We abated a property on Friday that has the potential to be a chronic nuisance. And this is a really good example of one that does affect everybody that lives around it, probably within a mile around it. I don't want to disclose the address or anything, but I have some before and after pictures if you guys would like to see them. I could share them on my screen. It's up to you guys. I know it's getting late.
Is that allowable, Catherine? If it's in the process?
Is the property identifiable, Wendy, by the pictures? Like,
No, there's no street signs or house numbers or anything.
okay,
It's up to you guys.
no, that's fine, go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna try. Holy cow. Okay, I don't know how. Can you see that full size?
Yeah,
We can see it.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
kind of small, though.
Okay, let me see if this helps. Does that help? So these are before and after pictures of the abatement on Friday. What you're looking at here is all household trash. The rat infestation, the bugs, the roaches, was horrific on this property. More household trash and just wood and stuff like that. More household trash. The trash on this property was just, it was horrific. And this property owner really did not care one way or the other about getting rid of the trash. And unfortunately, I feel like that's a potential chronic property that we may have to do that more than once. So that's one, that property, we started that code case in March and we were just now able to get it to abatement. So that kind of gives you the idea on the time frame that we deal with on how long it takes to get a property. So if you can imagine that getting back to the same shape and us having to go through that process again and again and again, what the neighbors are going through, that's kind of what we're looking for on this ordinance to help us get through.
Ryan, did you have any final comments?
The only final comment I have is actually to thank Wendy for working with us and for her service. She is going to be moving on to, we'll call them greener pastures, but I don't know about that. And we are currently looking for a new community services supervisor.
Well, congratulations on your new job, opportunity, and adventures in life, Wendy, but we're sure going to miss you here at the city.
And oh, shoot.
Thank you. I'm going to miss it too.
Well, in honor of some of Wendy's last days, is there a motion? Councilmember Smith.
Madam Mayor and Council, I move to approve ordinance number 15, series of 2022 on first reading with the aforementioned revisements.
And we will get a chance to see it again on second reading to make sure that we're happy with those.
Right, yeah, make sure you keep your notes, we make sure that they're
Second.
changed accordingly. Amy Schmischer?
Oh, I can wait for discussion. I just had a question.
It is time for discussion.
Thank you. Is there I really appreciate the suggestion about the potential of including the intent within the policy manual. I am wondering what the timeline on drafting and finalizing that is, though. I want to make sure that we're not putting the cart before the horse.
We are pretty close to a final draft. I think it's on my plate to finalize. We've been working on it for a year and a half, on and off.
I think we could probably have it done
Yeah.
by the next reading,
Mhm.
if you wanted to see it.
Yeah, that would be fantastic if it's possible to see that, specifically as it relates to property ownership and that kind of continuity.
Yeah, it's a big document, but we
Oh.
can point you to that spot.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Or you can read the whole thing.
It's not 500 pages,
Your
is it?
call.
All right, there's been a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Call vote.
Councilmember Dennehy?
Aye.
Councilmember Schmischer?
Aye.
Councilmember B. Smith?
Aye.
Councilmember Tracy?
Aye.
Councilmember Worthington?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick?
Hi.
Thank you, council. Thank you, staff. Thank you, CCPD and Wendy, so much, and for all that you do. We really appreciate it. It is time now to move to executive session. Turn the
I have
time
a
over.
motion.
Sure, Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick.
I move that the city enter into executive sessions for the following purposes. Executive session to receive legal advice on specific legal questions pursuant to CRS 24-6-404, 4024B concerning options for providing electric power to the city.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. Any discussion? Vote, please.
Councilmember Dennehy?
Aye.
Schmischer?
Aye.
B. Smith?
Aye.
Tracy?
Aye.
Worthington?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick.
Aye.
We're going to stand here. I'm going to go make a couple copies real quick.
All right, well, council might need a little break too, so here's a chance to go get some water.